Long before the message of Islam illuminated Arabia, the land was drenched in shadows, not of night, but of ignorance, arrogance, and injustice. It was an age where power defined worth, lineage determined dignity, and wealth dictated morality. In this world, the weak were forgotten, the poor were oppressed, and women, the very heart of the home, were often stripped of their honor and humanity. This was the world before the Qur'an was revealed, before the Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, stood in Makkah to proclaim justice and mercy for all. To understand the magnitude of Islam's light, we must first understand the darkness that surrounded it. In pre-Islamic Arabia, society was built upon tribalism, a structure that bound people together by blood, not by principles. A man's tribe was his protection, his strength, and his pride. But it was also a prison. Every tribe had its own code of honor, its own vengeance, its own idols, and its own measure of worth. If one member was insulted, the entire tribe demanded revenge. Wars could last generations over a single word or wound. Justice was not based on truth, but on power, and mercy was seen as weakness. The Qur'an would later condemn this mindset, reminding believers that all mankind is one, created from a single soul, and that honor belongs only to the righteous, not the powerful. But before Islam, such ideas were unheard of. Within this tribal order, women held a fragile place. They were sometimes honored, and sometimes despised. They could be queens in one clan and slaves in another. Their worth depended entirely on the men around them. Some tribes valued women for their roles as mothers, poets, or caretakers, but most saw them as possessions, bought, sold, or inherited. A woman had no guaranteed right to property, inheritance, or consent. When her husband died, she herself could be inherited by his heirs, just like a camel or a sword. The Qur'an would later abolish this, declaring, "O you who believe, it is not lawful for you to inherit women against their will." But in that time, such practices were seen as normal, even honorable. Marriage was not a sacred bond, it was a transaction. Wealthy men married multiple wives for status or pleasure. Poor men sometimes sold their daughters for survival. If a woman bore sons, she was respected. If she bore daughters, her worth diminished in the eyes of society. The tragedy of female infanticide, Wad al-Banat, was the darkest of all. Some fathers, driven by pride or fear of poverty, buried their daughters alive. They believed it was shameful to raise a girl who could one day be captured or dishonor the tribe. The Qur'an would later capture this horror in unforgettable words. And when the female infant buried alive is asked for what sin she was killed. This verse became one of the earliest revelations to shake the conscience of mankind, a cry for justice echoing through centuries of silence. Before Islam, not all women were oppressed, but even the privileged lived within walls of limitation. In noble tribes, women like Khadija bint Khuwaylid, may Allah be pleased with her, became successful traders and leaders, known for their intelligence and character. But these were rare exceptions in a system that largely viewed women as secondary beings. Honor was defined by men and measured through dominance. Strength was proven through war. Poets glorified battle and vengeance, not mercy. Fathers wept when they had no sons to bear arms, and wealth was seen as the ultimate proof of divine favor. In this world, class divisions ran deep. The poor were despised. Slaves were treated as property, stripped of all rights. Foreigners, or people without tribal protection, were vulnerable to abuse. The idea that all humans were equal before Allah was almost unimaginable. Yet, in every generation, Allah planted seeds of truth, lone hearts who saw through the darkness, men and women who refused to worship idols, who questioned the cruelty around them, who longed for a faith that spoke to justice. Among them were Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail and other Hunafa, who rejected false gods and refused to harm the innocent. Zayd would rescue baby girls from being buried alive and raise them as his own. He would stand by the Kaaba and say, "O Quraysh, none of you follows the religion of Ibrahim except me." His words fell on deaf ears, but his courage echoed the truth, that the soul of Arabia had lost its way. Power without morality had made men blind. Tribal pride had killed compassion. And in the absence of divine law, people became slaves, not just to idols, but to their desires. The social injustices of that age weren't just against women or the poor. They were against the very concept of humanity. A widow could be forced into remarriage. A slave could be beaten without consequence. A weak tribe could be raided, their children taken as spoils of war. This was not just darkness. It was chaos disguised as order. And yet, within that chaos, Allah was preparing the world for the greatest revolution in moral history, the rise of Islam. A message that would break chains, restore dignity, and declare that all human beings, men and women, are servants of the same Creator. When the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, later stood before his people and said, "The most honorable of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous among you," it was not just a verse, it was a complete transformation of how society measured worth. Islam would abolish the idea that a man's tribe or wealth defined him. It would give women inheritance rights, ownership rights, and a voice in marriage. It would condemn infanticide as a crime and mercy as a virtue. And it would build a new community, the Ummah, united not by blood, but by faith. But before that light could rise, the old world had to crumble. And the Quraysh, at the peak of their arrogance and power, were blind to the storm that was about to come. They believed their idols protected them. They believed their bloodlines made them superior. They believed that the weak would always serve the strong. But Allah, the Lord of the Kaaba, had decreed otherwise. The age of ignorance was nearing its end. And soon, from this very city, Makkah, a man would rise to restore justice, honor, and truth. A man who would stand for the orphan, defend the widow, and honor the daughter. A messenger who would embody mercy itself, Rahmatan lil Alameen, a mercy to all worlds. In the next episode, we'll discover the role of poets, storytellers, and wisdom in pre-Islamic Arabia, how the tongue became a weapon, and how poetry shaped the pride and power of nations. It was a world where words could start wars, and soon, where words would change the world.